We think women need to talk more openly about money because money really matters. It shouldn't be embarrassing or confusing. Join the conversation. We'll be discussing a whole range of topics which will help you get comfortable with your finances. Money Matters. Brought to you by AJ Bell.
Hello, welcome to another AJ Bell Money Matters podcast. I'm Laura and Danni is here with me. Hey, Danni.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everyone. I hope whenever you are listening to this pod, the sun is still shining because it is glorious today. And it just makes such a difference to how everybody feels, not just about life in general, but also about their finances. And I was really struck because we had some retail sales figures out last week, and Christmas was pretty dire for retailers. People just weren't spending. But in March, because the sun was out, people were spending on everything from, clothes that they could swap out for their big, thick jumpers to garden furniture to all sorts of stuff because you just want to go out and do things.
Yeah, exactly. There's been a lot of gloom around, a lot of it tied to Donald Trump's tariffs and a lot to do with all those price increases on our bills, which came in from the start of April. But there are also these bright spots, like Danni mentions, whether it's the weather, whether it's people going out and buying new items. There's also the expectation of an interest rate cut coming from the Bank of England in May. And we'll obviously bring you more on that in our next podcast episode after it's happened, potentially. But also petrol prices are falling. That's another bright spell for anyone who is a driver. And there's the expectation that the energy price cap will come down in the summer as well. So all nice things that we like to see.
Yeah, and it's nice to be able to talk about some good news for a change because the temptation is just to go with bad news, and there has been quite a bit of bad news out there. But we want to stick with the positives because this month the world has been celebrating Earth Day. It's something I hadn't come across until my kids were at primary school, as you can imagine, a bit like World Book Day, any excuse to dress up. But it's an event which has actually been running since 1970. And I don't think anyone will be surprised to learn that it's all about highlighting environmental issues and challenging and empowering people to change their lives to better protect our planet.
And of course, Money Matters is all about money, about investing for your future. And we thought Earth Day was a good chance to get into what's called ESG investing. But we hate jargon. So let's deal with that bit of jargon initially. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance investing. But to boil it down, lots of people call it sustainable or responsible investing. So basically thinking about more than financial returns when it comes to choosing how you invest your money.
And we have drafted in the fantastic Roberta Barr, who co-manages the Schroder Global Sustainable Value Equity Fund. I know it's a mouthful, but I promise she is brilliant. She's going to talk through what sustainable investing is, the fact that sustainable or responsible investing has really different red lines depending on who you are, because some people might think investing in an oil company is just something that they can't support, but others might think that those companies actually have the potential to deliver change right from the front lines. It is a fascinating subject. And what is brilliant is Roberta is really passionate about it. It is a great listen, so do stay tuned for that.
But before we hear from Roberta, it's time for our one big thing. And this week, it's all about an administrative error that means thousands of pensioners, mostly women, have been underpaid their state pension, and in some cases for many, many years. So since January 2021, the Department for Work and Pensions, also known as the DWP, has been carrying out what's called a correction exercise. So looking at hundreds of thousands of pension records to check if pensioners were paid the right amount. It says it's now reviewed the majority of records, but it's still waiting for some people to contact them with information, which means that the review probably won't be completed until March 2027. But let's go through the numbers because they've just updated us on how this review is going in the past week. So it has said that now 131,000 people, just shy of that, were affected by this admin error. And the average underpayment was just over £6,000, which is a huge amount when you break it down to some people, particularly if you're relying on the state pension as as your main or only income. And that's an additional almost 12,000 people who've been identified in the past 6 months alone as having been underpaid their state pension. So as a result, the government has had to pay out £805 million, and the Office for Budget Responsibility previously estimated that the review could eventually cost the government almost £3 billion, which would make it one of the biggest benefit scandals of modern times.
Yes, now it relates to people who should have been entitled to uplifts. This is under the pre 2016 system. Lots changed in 2016, so we will be in a very different position when we finally come to get our state pension. But due to administrative errors, lots of people didn't get these uplifts. Now, I think no one will be surprised to learn that the way that state pensions are worked out is really complicated. And that means that thousands of people may have been paid the wrong amount for years and just never realized it. Now, the amount of retirement pension that you get usually depends on your national insurance record. Particularly for older pensioners, the amount you get could depend on the national insurance contributions made by your spouse. Now, errors have arisen, of course, when the government has failed to automatically uplift pensions of married women when their husbands retired, or failed to uplift pensions when someone was bereaved, lost a husband or wife. Also, those over 80 with a low state pension entitlement who were not automatically uplifted when they turned 80. So, just looking at some of the numbers, more than 50,000 of those underpaid were widows or widowers. Just under 50,000 were married women, and 34,000 were over 80s. Now, the government has spent years trying to fix these problems, but there are still many thousands of people, many of them older women, who are still on the wrong pension.
And I think what you talked about there, Danny, is, it being super complicated to work it out yourself. You then kind of trust that the government is going to do that job for you. And I think a lot of people just put their faith in the fact that they were being paid the right amount. The DWP is also looking into another error that's affecting hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women again. So as many as 370,000 people are thought to have missed out on what's called home responsibilities protection. So this was a scheme set up to help protect parents and carers' state pension. The DWP started looking into this second error in January last year. And those that are affected are mainly mothers who had children before 2000. But by September last year, HMRC had issued over 370,000 letters to people who might have missed out, and almost 20,000 applications have since been reassessed. Now, the figures here are huge. The average underpayment was just under £7,900, found in over 5,000 cases. We've not had an update on this one, so this isn't kind of fresh details like we had with the previous one, but we wanted to flag it because if you've always thought that your pension seems a bit low, or if you've been chatting to friends and you think they get a bit more than me, then it is worth contacting the pension service to ask them to check, especially if you spent time at home raising a child, so out of work, or if you were widowed and your pension didn't change when your spouse died. So we do have a statement from DWP. A spokesperson from there said, "Our priority is ensuring pensioners receive the dignity and security they deserve in retirement, and that state pension underpayment rates remain as low as possible. We have now completed the vast majority of cases in the exercise as planned, with a small number of outstanding cases due to further documentation needed from the customer."
So, of course, if you have been contacted and there is further documentation that you need to share with the government, then make sure you get on with that, because until they've got all that data, they can't then process and give you extra money if you are owed it. Also, I just wanted to flag that if you've taken time out of the workplace for any reason, maybe you're actually taking some time out right now to look after kids. Remember, you can still buy back up to 6 years of missing national insurance contributions. We've spoken about this a couple of times on our podcast, and although you can no longer go all the way back to 2006, you can still plug gaps for that 6 year period, as I say, if you have them. Now, remember, if you claim child benefit, even if you don't get the actual money, you will still get national insurance credit. So it is well worth making sure that you fill in the forms, even if you don't think, because of either your earnings or your partner's earnings, that you won't actually get the money or you'll have to pay it back.
This was actually a topic that came up at lunch with my friends this weekend, and I didn't even raise it. I wasn't bringing down the mood with pension chat. And a couple of them said that they'd been in that situation where they hadn't claimed child benefit because they weren't entitled to it, but they were out of work and they now are missing those NI credits. The government is actually meant to be doing something specifically for parents who missed out on national insurance credits by not claiming child benefit. Is meant to be helping to rectify that situation. So we will keep you up to date when news on that comes out, hopefully later this year. But now it's time to switch topic and hear from our guest this week. You may have seen news stories in the past couple of weeks celebrating Earth Day 2025. It started 55 years ago in the US and is now celebrated by millions of people around the world. It's a chance for people to honour the achievements of the environmental movement and highlight the need to protect the planet. But the theme this year is Our Power, Our Planet. And as the name suggests, it's a call to arms to get people to unite around renewable energy. But from a Money Matters perspective, we get lots of our listeners and newsletter subscribers who come along to our events who are interested in how investing can help them finance their own futures, but also work for everyone's future. So, for example, investing in renewable energy in companies that look after the world and their workforce. But it can be quite complicated to work out which companies are doing good things, which are overstating it, which is called greenwashing, and where to get started with this. So helpfully, there are lots of fund managers who will do the work for you. One of those is Roberta Barr, who co-manages the Schroder Global Sustainable Value Equity Fund. Let's hear what she had to say.
For many people, just understanding what ESG is can be tricky. So let's start with the basics. What does ESG mean when it comes to investing?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a great question because I think even my mum, who I talk to all the time about my job and how much I love it, I'm not even sure she absolutely knows what ESG even stands for sometimes. So ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So it's sort of essentially a set of topics that investors use to evaluate companies, sort of beyond just the traditional financial returns. So you're looking at how a company impacts the environment, so things like its carbon emissions or its fresh water use, or you're looking at how it treats people and communities. So, for example, how well is it doing in mitigating the risk that there's forced labour in the supply chains? How are they treating their employees? Are they paying them sort of fair living wage? How are they acting as a sort of general and responsible employer? And it's just looking at how a company actually is sort of being led. So its ethics, its transparency, and its governance. And it's really just about understanding those long-term risks and opportunities that don't sort of traditionally show up in your financial accounting, so your profit and loss statements or your balance sheet.
So it's really looking through the numbers into almost, the ethos of a company.
Exactly. What it's doing and how it's doing it, basically.
It sounds great, but I suppose the big question is, how do you measure that?
I mean, it's a great question because, I mean, there's the whole focus on greenwashing at the moment. So essentially, people saying they're investing sustainably, but as soon as you sort of look behind the curtain, it doesn't smell quite right. And it's because there is no universal correct way to work out whether or not a company is sustainable. Ultimately, there's always going to be a set of trade-offs and sort of subjective judgments that you make to decide whether or not a company is suitable for, a portfolio which is aiming to have certain ESG standards, which then obviously is going to lead sort of scope for greenwashing if there are bad actors. So, for example, I think it's been in the news quite a bit recently, but if you take something like solar panels, we all know that renewable energy is going to be a great thing and reducing emissions, it's the way of the future. But actually, it's not all as good as it seems. There's a really poor track record of the labour rights in the supply chain. Some of the things that they're having to use in those solar panels aren't necessarily sort of being sourced in the most responsible and ethical ways. they rely on these sort of rare earth materials, which are, dripping, to be honest, with forced labour. So some ESG raters might say, no, they're great, they're going to solve a lot of the net zero problems, look at what they're doing for the environment. Whereas some people are going to look at it and say, how on earth could you have a product which has got forced labour all over it? How is that a good thing from a sort of sustainability ESG standpoint? Or just for another example, and one which I think is actually really interesting, is electric vehicles, EVs. We all see them as the way of the future. Having an EV is quite a statement from a sustainability point of view. But actually, people forget that electric vehicles are a lot heavier than traditional vehicles. And because they're heavier, that means that the tyres emit a lot more microplastics in frictions with the roads. It's something like 20% more microplastics are emitted through electric vehicles than in your sort of traditional combustion engine car. And tyres themselves are responsible already for something like 30% of all microplastics. So yes, great for sort of carbon dioxide emissions, but actually the other environmental impacts of EVs do need to be looked at as well. It's not a sort of perfect solution by any stretch. You're always going to have these judgments. You're always going to have these decisions to make. And I think it ultimately means that ESG investing can't just be some sort of tick box exercise. You're always going to have to sort of look into a company, understand exactly what it does, the good and the bad, and actually make that assessment of whether or not this is suitable for whatever the sustainability objectives are for your portfolio.
So it's incredibly difficult for someone that works in this space like yourself, but for just someone that's thinking about investing, maybe thinking about investing for the first time,
Yeah.
they might have really different red lines from, their sister or their mother.
Yeah.
How do they figure out what works for them?
It's really tricky. And I think we're really fortunate sort of today that companies like AJ Bell, and Danny, you'll be much better to answer this than me, but actually they're becoming more sophisticated and understanding actually clients do have these sort of social, ethical, environmental red lines that they're not willing to cross. So you're beginning to see much more things like where you can filter different offerings for whatever it is that you care about, whether that is the environment, whether that is gender equality, whether it's animal testing. You can say, actually, these things I care about, these things I'm fine with, and sort of find funds which can suit you a bit better.
Because also, for some people, these red lines are also sort of changing. There's been an awful lot of talk just over the last few months about whether defense companies should fall into one of these ESG pots because, on the one hand, obviously, security of a country, massively important, protecting citizens. We've also seen, a lot of these companies providing ammunition for soldiers fighting in Ukraine against Russia, but for other people, that is just a line that shouldn't be crossed.
Yeah, and it just highlights how sort of nuanced and subjective some of these assessments are. Like, no company you're ever going to be able to say is 100% of the time good or 100% bad. There's always going to be sort of ebbs and flows, and there's always going to be subjective decisions. Defense, as you say, is one example, but even something like a pharmaceutical company, where obviously a company's making medicines, is helping to cure people, is making vaccines, that's a great thing. But then you get pharmaceutical companies which are doing these sort of horrific price gouging, or they absolutely aren't following sort of appropriate quality and safety guidelines. And then is that a sustainable company? Yes, they are curing people, but also they're not acting responsibly. So it's this sort of, it's why greenwashing exists, right? Because it's a messy and complicated area. But I think maybe that's the beauty behind it, is that you care, and actually making that step in the right direction, however imperfect it is, that's better than just saying this is too difficult, I'm too lazy to deal with this, nothing's perfect. Oh, look, people can make an argument against one specific company which I actually think is doing good, so I'm just going to walk away from it. It's a really juicy area, and one that I think is Yeah, there's so much potential to do good in it, or also bad. So, yeah, I love it personally.
One other area which there's been a lot of discussion about recently is the sort of issue of fossil fuels, and
Mm,
we've got the big oil and gas companies like BP that were focusing on renewables to a huge degree, rolling back on that
yeah.
because fossil fuels have been making a lot of money.
Mm,
Do people sacrifice that ability to make their money work the hardest because they have a social conscience? They want to get involved in that messy situation that you're talking about?
yeah. I think firstly, the whole industry needs just some, honesty in this area, because it was all very well when it was you can have your cake and eat it. When sustainability was doing really well, it was selling really well, and growth was doing really well. So it all kind of aligned, and it looked like you could get the best returns through investing sustainably. My goodness, how amazing! What a great thing. Whereas actually, the reality is, as with any constraint that you put on a fund, whether you're saying, I don't want to invest in anywhere outside of Europe, for example, or I'm only going to invest in really small companies rather than small and large companies, as soon as you put a constraint on your ability to hold companies which you could think have a great financial return, you do reduce your potential to outperform. You could easily miss out on a company, say a tobacco company, which isn't doing a lot of good, but it goes 10 times up in share price over the next few years. Or equally, you could avoid holding an oil and gas company which doesn't transition well and loses a lot of money for its shareholders. Like, there is a balance here. You are reducing your potential financial outperformance, but that doesn't mean that your money can't still work really hard. I think what's most important is that we just don't over exaggerate the impact of that financial performance in either direction. If you have a good active manager, they should still be able to find you good returns in whatever sort of constrained space you're asking.
And just sort of sticking with oil and gas, one of the things that I've heard a lot of institutional investors talking about is the potential that ultimately, if those companies don't move into a renewable space and the world moves on 10, 20, 30 years time, we really have to reach those net zero targets. um, Potentially they could find some of those assets stranded, that's the
Yeah.
jargon, but not be in a place where they can continue to make money, or potentially find that they've got to pay damages for their operations, climate damage that they've done.
Yeah, and you've already seen that in some sort of mining companies in the past, suddenly being hit with sort of big cleanup bills for having to make good the big holes that they've dug, for example. So that's absolutely a risk for oil and gas companies, and it's a risk which people investing in those oil and gas companies should take into account when it comes to the financial returns. That's not to say that there aren't still attractive oil and gas companies out there. It's just to say it ESG sort of comes into play into two ways. One way is making sure you're making a good investment, so you are appropriately considering all the different financial aspects, like you talk about that sort of stranded asset risk or potential provisions for the future. And one way is to meet the sort of sustainability requirements of clients. So whatever they're asking for from a sort of ethical point of view. So the stranded assets, that's very much on the financial side of things. Everyone should be taking that into account. I'm not sure that they actually are properly taking it into account. I think people are often so keen to say, no, we're not a sustainable investor, that they'll then go and ignore actually real sort of ESG risks in some of those companies. But that's another issue. But so you have that ESG financial integration, and you have that ESG sort of focus labeling as well. So it's kind of two parts of the same coin. The better you can understand either part, the better they're going to feed into each other. I personally do both. Unsustainable funds will just do the financial side. So it depends. But I mean, as you say, it just adds a huge amount of complexity and challenge to the whole equation.
It is complicated.
Yeah.
So for people that are interested, that want to put their money into ways that not only benefit themselves, but also maybe benefits society, benefits the future of the planet. What should they look for? What do you look for?
Well, so the first thing I think is important to say is actively investing is the first step. There's so many people I know who are intelligent, who work really hard for their money, who just then go and put it in a cash account that's not even earning inflation is unreal. The fact that people are going out there and actively investing your money, you're setting yourself up for, a good financial future. But just like you probably wouldn't want to go into certain jobs because of the impact of those jobs, you also shouldn't be putting your money into things which don't align with, who you are as a person and what you want from the world, in my opinion. This is all my opinion. So I think what it comes down to is, one, yes, invest. Two, be honest with yourself. What do you care about? Kind of like you were saying before, what are your red lines? What are you and not willing to cross? And then go and find a provider who can actually give you those filters and allow you to find good investment options which meet your personal requirements. I'm very lucky that I work at Schroder's, where we have a great range of sustainability funds. They can meet what I want from sustainability, and I can invest in a way which I'm confident is hopefully setting me up for success in the future and is not compromising on my sort of sustainability requirements personally.
It's been fantastic talking to you, Roberta. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Really insightful.
Oh, thank you for having me, Danny. It's always great to chat.
Roberta Barr there from the Schroder's Sustainable Value Equity Fund. So someone who clearly loves her job. And I would say probably one of my favourite bits of the job is getting to hear the financial confessions from our guests. So Danny, did Roberta have one for us?
She certainly did. And it was pretty apt, actually. And before I let you go, I have to ask for your either financial dilemma or confession. And as I say, we've had all sorts.
Yeah.
But have you got one to share with us?
So it's probably a little boring for some people, but I'm a value investor. So I'm buying kind of contrary to the market. So nothing growthy, exciting. These are very much unloved, underappreciated companies. Now, because that's my job, I should therefore be hedging against the performance of my job with my investments. That would make sense for me to put my savings into growthy funds, because when my job's going badly, my savings will be doing well. When my savings are doing badly, my job will be doing well. But like any true value investor, I am far too stubborn. I will absolutely not take my own advice and have a balanced portfolio, and I'm all in on value, which I'm happy with it, but arguably is a very silly investment choice.
Well, you're sticking by your guns, which
Yeah,
I
exactly.
particularly love. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I like the variety we get in these. I mean, some people's is like I spend way too much money on handbags, or I shop on Instagram. This feels very much more finance and investment focused, but I like it.
I know. I just love that she was just like, I really, really should be looking at growth. I really should be thinking about something else, but I just like the companies that I look at. So that's where I'm keeping my money. Yeah, absolutely fascinating. And you're right, we get such a brilliant span of different kinds of confessions. It is, as you say, a really good part of the episode. And don't forget, you can share your financial confessions with us via our social media. You can find us at AJ Bell Money Matters. That is all for this episode. Don't forget to sign up to our newsletter so that you don't miss any of our articles, podcasts, or in-person events. You can do that via our website at ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk.
And we are delighted that our next in-person event is coming up. We will be at the Affordable Art Fair in Hampstead Heath from the 7th to the 11th of May. And for our lucky newsletter subscribers who applied for free tickets to the event, you should now have an email with all the information that you need. And if you're coming along, definitely come and visit our stand and come and say hi. Danny and I and lots of the rest of the Money Matters team will be going along. Don't miss us. We'll be decked out in all of our Money Matters gear.
Yeah, and do listen to our next episode because we're going to be chatting with Jennifer Connor from Affordable Art Fair UK about the event, how it started, what it's all about, and also about investing in affordable art. So do join us then.
And we'll make sure we put plenty of pictures of the event up on our social media pages. But until next time, thanks for listening.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.